Welcome to Women of the World, a show which gives a voice to women from around the world who have chosen to make the United States their home. Our program believes in the principles written on and enshrined by the Statue of Liberty. Here's today's moderator, Nadia Jordana.
Hello and welcome to Women of the World. I'm Nadia Jordana and I'll be your moderator today. We have a great show for you, but let me introduce my co-hosts. First we have Gloria Van Demeltrod.
Thank you, Nadia. I'm very happy to be here and delighted to hear what our guest has to say.
It's good to have you here. And Ann McKenna.
Hi, Nadia. I'm so glad I made it today.
We are too.
Yes.
And we have a special guest today, Dr. Tess Galati.
Nadia.
Welcome, Doctor.
Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
So good to be here.
And tell us a little bit about you first before we get into your immigration story, which I know is going to be very interesting.
Where to start? It did start with immigration. When I was 7, we came here in 1948. We came here, as most immigrants do, to avoid being killed or kidnapped. In our case, it would be kidnapped. It's a little known story, but in Greece in 1947-48, over 20,000 children were kidnapped and sent across to Yugoslavia to be raised as good Bolsheviks. My brother and I were on the list, and my mother learned, and although she had the strangest story, she had a prenup that said that my father would never ask her to come to America, never. But when this happened, she decided she'd come to America to save us.
So was he there? Was he in America?
Yes, my father was an American citizen. He had been here as a teenager back at the beginning of the 20th century. And as most men, he came here for work. And he made a lot of money. He became a rich man in Boone, Iowa. He had the first Model T and fell in love with a woman, French woman, and gave it all up to go back to Greece because the only way to leave her was to leave America, as he said to his friends. They didn't have 12-step groups in those days, maybe, I don't know. But he went back to Greece, met my mother, married her, and then the war came. And we starved during the Second World War, literally. I remember this very well. But then after the war, he came back to make money, sent it back to us. The plan was for him to come back home. But no, there was no coming back home after the kidnapping of children started.
So I had never heard of the kidnapping of children during those times. What was behind that?
The nationalists and the communists were at war. So after the Second World War, the Greeks started to fight each other. And it was nationalists and communists. And some of my cousins were communists, my dad's family. In fact, I met the one who was planning to kidnap us. I met him as an old man, and I said to him, thank you, thank you. Because of you, I went to America, and I'm much better off materially, for sure, than I would have been in Greece. So we did pull it all together again. I liked him very much, in fact. But the plan was to send these children who were basically, many of them starving after the Second World War. We weren't, but many were. To send them to Yugoslavia to become good Bolsheviks. And it's not a well-known story, but it's a true one.
What does that mean? To become
communists. To become communists, because we didn't know in this civil war in Greece, it was not clear who was going to win, obviously. So they were taking the children.
Have you written this story, Tess? That story?
Not that piece of it. I'm going to Greece for 3 months this winter, and my plan is to write that part of the story and beyond. I've started writing immigrant stories, and it's just got me. I can't write poetry anymore because the immigrant stories have me right here.
Would you tell us, in your memory, clear as it can be now, what it was like coming as a 7-year-old? Were you afraid? Was it exciting? What happened?
It was, and I have actually an amazingly clear memory of that.
Great.
We came on the Marine Carp. Isn't that an exciting and romantic name for a ship? The Marine Carp. The Marine Carp was an American warship that had been turned into an immigrant ship. And we were down in steerage in a cabin with about 20 people, 3 up. So we were sleeping in bunk beds, 3 up. And my mother and us kids, we were on the bottom. She begged to be on the bottom so we could see each other and not have to climb. But it was a horrible, horrible 2 weeks because people don't weigh as much as armaments. Therefore, the ship bounced along the ocean like a walnut shell full of ants, as my mother used to put it. So for 2 weeks, we were all seasick. Seasick, a lot of seasickness, ugliness. And some really interesting times as well. But I remember seeing the Statue of Liberty from the feet up. And all the immigrants were we all climbed up because we were there. We got there, being the United States. And they were all on deck looking at the Statue of Liberty and saying, "We won't be killed now," and crying. And we were all we felt safe, especially the displaced people, which is what we used to call refugees. You know, these were people whose countries had been erased by the war. So they were DPs, and they were from all over. They were from Egypt. We went and picked up people in Egypt before we came westward, and they were particularly glad to be here, as so many are. But there were some families, a lot of women and children as well, a lot of women alone, a lot of men alone. It was just a combination of people.
How many were in your family that came?
My mother, my little brother, and I. And my father was already back in Boone, Iowa. So we, you know, Ellis Island had a place underneath where the trains came. That's, in fact, in Ellis Island. You just walked down into the train and you were in the United States. So our feet did not touch ground until we got to Boone, Iowa. We went from the train, from the ship down into Ellis Island, into the train, and then back. So the first person to meet us, actually there were many who met us, most of them in uniform, and they were not the nicest. But the first person who actually smiled at us was the porter on the train. I'll never forget him. He was black. I'd never seen a black person, ever, ever, ever. I'd seen them only in stories that my grandmother used to tell. But here he was, and he was wearing a uniform, and he was smiling. That's just unheard of. People in uniforms don't smile. So I suddenly realized we're safe, because here's a person in a uniform who's smiling. And I'll never forget that experience.
Because that was different in Greece.
In Greece, people didn't smile as much. Of course, it was a war, so nobody smiled. But people in uniforms were just so serious. Except for the American soldiers on the bus during the war, because my father and I were on the bus during the war, and the soldiers were there. My father talked to them in English, and then my dad said, "Sing them your song." And I'm like, "Okay." So I stood up real straight and I said, "Oh my darling, oh my darling, oh my darling Clementine." and they gave me chocolate bars. So I realized there were people in uniforms who actually smiled, because they smiled. And I remember the chocolate bars and the smiling, and here was a man, and he was black, and he was wearing a uniform, and he was smiling. Oh, this was all very good for a 7-year-old, right? So that was a very high point in the experience.
Those first impressions are incredible.
They really are. They really are. And as a consultant, I remember working with the Immigration and Naturalization Service, and we worked on what do we give to immigrants when they first come. In those days, we were welcoming immigrants, you know. And the idea was, what kind of a little package as a starter we give them? And they thought about giving them toothbrushes and soap, and I said, no, don't do that. That's a message that they're not clean. That's not really what you want to do. Some food, you want some food, you know, bars, candy bars, whatever, something beautiful, you know, a little, I don't know, flower if possible, something like that. But it took some effort for people to get that, because as the receiving country, we really don't know how to receive as well. It's not just the immigrants don't know how to act in the new world. we also don't know how to receive them. So
How were
that's
you
a good
received in
point.
Boone, Iowa? What was your reaction, your
goodness.
first impressions there?
Well, we got to my dad's restaurant. He had a restaurant. He slept in the kitchen for 2 years. Can you imagine? He didn't have a home.
Oh my.
Because he was sending money to us. And he was in his 60s.
Really?
Yeah. Well, you know, we don't age. We're Greek. So, you know, I'm 77, and people have trouble with that. But he was in his 60s, and he was working. So he sent his red-haired, the wife of his partner, who was a red-haired Irish woman, and her daughter, to pick us up. I had never seen red hair either.
Oh.
I thought it was painted. So here they were, and they met us and took us to the restaurant, and we had all the ice cream we wanted, and it felt good. And then we lived in a tenement across the street in 2 rooms, and we didn't have a bathroom or a sink. That was out in the hall. But, you know, there's something that we did have, which those around us didn't necessarily. We had a lot of community. Even within our family and the 2 or 3 Greeks that were around there. We had a lot of intellectual stimulation because we talked all the time, and we talked about things that mattered. We talked philosophy, we talked values, ethics, we talked politics, we talked all of it, and children were very much included in that. So I felt very much a part of a community. And the material, not having material things didn't really count until I went to school and I realized, oh, you're supposed to have all these material things.
And especially when you're young, you don't think that much about the material things.
You're right, you're right. But then, you know, it was all new and it was all interesting, and I think my parents were the victims, my mother especially, because she's the one who had to give up so much. She was a lady, and she ended up working in a sweatshop, and so did I. So she gave up a lot, but she gave up mostly her roots, her culture. And what she did bring with her, the culture and the roots that she brought, were of no value here. And as children, we have, immigrant children, I think, always have a hard choice to make.
Yes, true. Very true.
Do you think so?
I think so.
The hard choice is, do I cut off my roots and fit in here?
Yes.
Or do I keep my roots
And not fit in.
and not fit in?
Yes.
That's a tough one.
So I made the choice to cut off my roots and live and be here, very much here, which made it possible then for me to get a doctorate and do all those things that I've done in my life, to have my own business, to marry a German, because I wasn't supposed to speak to Germans when we came here. So, of course, I had to marry one. All of those things. But, you know, that was a loss as well for me, and very much a loss for my mother, who lost me. And lost her children. She would say, I have lost my children to America.
Did she speak English, your mother?
Oh, she speak English, yes.
Yeah, that's like my mom,
English.
yeah.
And she was very, as she got older, she went back to Greece a lot. And she was very proud of her English, but not very well.
It sounds like her choice was to keep her roots here.
Yes.
And did she suffer from that in the community
Yes.
there? She did.
Very much so.
That's-
And when I was 17, she made one last ditch effort. She sent me back to Greece to be married. I didn't do it. I rebelled. But the idea was that I would then be the magnet that would bring us all back to Greece.
All back to Greece. Now that the war was over, and she probably always had that dream of going back home.
She did, and this was the way to do it. And also, American women, she had no respect. She thought they were very loose, and I was supposed to be more modest and more a lady, and going back to Greece was a way to save me. Well, that was not my plan at all.
Tell us
wasn't.
about going to school, becoming educated. You became extremely educated, which is fabulous.
And did you have to become naturalized?
Yes, and that's another strange thing that sets up a power dynamic in immigrant families. It's wrong, you know. Obviously, as the child who spoke for my family, I mean, I did the taxes when I was in 4th grade. I took them to school and had my teacher help, but they had to take me to the doctor's office and to the lawyer's office. They had to take me everywhere because I was a translator. You get a completely inappropriate enlargement of the ego when you're the child that does that. But beyond that, the immigration system at that point was, here's my father, a citizen. He could bring his children, but not his wife. But then once he brought his children, the children could invite their mother to come. So I became the first naturalized citizen, and I invited my mother to the United States. Do you see? The power dynamic then gets completely, inappropriately confused.
How did that affect you or your family?
Which part of it?
Well, when you talk of the power getting converted, or it's different?
It affected each of us differently.
Yes.
You know, the advantage of being bicultural, as you probably know, is this, it's the mental, your brain works harder, so you end up, you know, by 6th grade, children who speak 2 languages do better in math than children who don't. So you know your brain, and you get to a place where you're in a 3rd place where you can watch both cultures, and you can see the advantages and disadvantages of both cultures. So there are intellectual advantages. The emotional loss is huge. Huge. The emotional loss is a disconnect.
Yes.
And my mother's disconnect led to Alzheimer's disease, a terrible, terrible old age, hard times. My brother, who was treated as a Greek boy would be treated, also got an inflated ego at home because he got the bike, he got the bigger piece of cake. You know, it was always he got that. But at school, I was smarter. So then he had a lot hard time balancing
And
that.
a little competitive, maybe.
You know, oh, you're Tessie's little brother. You know, we expect a lot from you. You can imagine how hard that was for him. For me, it was a sense of, I do not have a family. This family sent me to Greece to be married. They don't even know me. So I went off on my own. But I lived during those times when Sputnik flew, you know, thank you, Sputnik. I hate to say that, because the United States then started something called the National Defense Education Act. Do you remember that?
Yes.
NDEA. Yes. And so they said, oh, we have to beat Sputnik. So we're going to put money into education. And kids who can't afford to go to school but are doing well in school will just pay for everything. Well, nobody had paid me for everything. Suddenly I had a scholarship from the bachelor's all the way to the doctorate. So I went to school. In my time, women didn't necessarily do that. It was not even a consideration.
How did you get back from Greece then without being married?
Yeah, good question.
Yeah, I wanted to know.
Well, I had an affair with my first cousin. It wasn't even real, but we made the family think it was real, and they were disgusted and sent me back. So I came back a black sheep, which also disconnected me. But that's, you know...
It was a means to an end.
Yes, yes. The advantage of that disconnect, though, is that I feel more connected to everyone, especially people at the boundaries. People who don't fit in, they're my people. They're my people. And so I have this wonderful collection of friends that are my family. They are people who do not fit in, because I know how to do that.
You know, I mean, I'm sitting here with my mind just, you know, roaring, because everything you are saying is so profound. And the way you are able to name things, you know, some of the things that I have felt, but you are naming them so profoundly and so well.
Thank you.
Yeah, so thanks for being here. So you did talk about writing the stories of immigrants, which I can see you doing amazingly well just by listening to you. Would you please share a little bit about that?
You know, it all started with the recent immigration issues in the United States. I couldn't watch television. I couldn't sleep. So I started writing. And then I found that I had in my files, I have all kinds of stories. I spent most of my life running the business that I started, which is Practical Communications Incorporated. For 37 years, I was a writing consultant in corporations. And I made videos and wrote books and sold them all over the country and beyond. So that's what I did, but in my off time, I would write stories and poems and just, you know, put them into the closet.
The more creative parts.
Right, but I didn't have time to do that work much. I would write rough drafts. Now I have rough drafts of a lot of things. So I found my immigrant stories, but they needed a lot of work to be finished, to be able to see the world and the world to see them. So I started revising when all the immigrant stuff started happening in the United States. And I've revised many of them. Now I'm going to Greece to finish writing the rest. And I'll be there this winter doing exactly that.
Why is it important for you to do that in Greece? Is that something you are choosing or you couldn't do here? Why are you making that choice?
Because of the sounds and the smells and the tastes of Greece. They're not the same.
Yeah.
So although I feel myself a citizen of the world, of the globe, my roots are really in that one place, you see.
And what place is that in Greece? Where did you live and where are you going back to within Greece?
Well, my father and mother already broke the rules before me. I broke them by marrying a German. But my mother and father broke them by my father being very northern Greek and my mother being very southern. Even that was a break of the rules at the time. So my mother was from the Peloponnese near Kalamata, and my father was in the border between Albania and Greece. And my father was from Suli. Suli was a tiny little pinprick of a place that was surrounded by the Ottoman Empire for 300 years, but never taken. So the Suli was 6 clans, about 12,000 people at its height, and they had a federation, a treaty with the Ottoman Empire that surrounded them. Can you believe it? And the women of Suli were known to be really tough. There was a woman's army of 1,200 women.
Oh my.
And what they did was kill Turks. Now, the women of my father's family are still very tough, very strong. They have none of the shame that's carried in the South, but none of the shame that's carried in countries where the Ottoman Empire had ruled. So the two families are quite different. I want to learn more about my father's family, especially. My mother's family is Italian and Greek, and more art and more feminine and all the rest. So she always said, "Oh, you're just like your father's family," and I think she was right.
So you've got a book that will be not necessarily born in Greece, but it will be inspired and fleshed out when you're there. Now, you already have a book also.
Yes.
Tell us a little bit about the book you've written already. Is that a combination of, I haven't read it, there's poetry in there, I know, but there's more to it than that.
Yes, and meditations as well. I also have a set of 4 books called Writing for the Information Age, which sold all over the country before, but I've left that aside for now. But the book that I wrote last year, or put together last year from a lot of the writing, is called Holy Trinity, Maiden, Mother, Crone. And I painted an icon in the 14th century Russian tradition, and that's what the cover of the book is. It's a Russian icon of the Maiden, Mother, and Crone. Of course, Russian icons were all Christian religious, and this one is a renegade icon. You know, it's not Christian, but it is definitely spiritual. the word crone, if you look it up in Webster's dictionary, you're going to be discouraged. It's hag, old battle axe, it's roadkill. It has wonderful, horrible meanings, but it may very well have come from the Greek word chronos, which means time and age.
Oh, yeah,
And
wise woman I think of when I hear that.
I will take that one. I'll take that side of it. So I think maiden, mother, and crone, really, that does define the ages of women. And when you're an immigrant woman, that adds another dimension. Because immigrant women especially, you know, we are the carriers of the culture. We raise the children to be, this is the way you should be, shouldn't be. We carry the culture. And when the culture is torn from you and you have to start in another culture, that's an incredible demand.
Yes.
So then you have to grow in a huge way to be able to contain it. So I think immigrant women especially are the salvation. Sorry to put it that way, but I think we are really, because we have had to open our hearts, our minds to contain all the world, possibly.
Because of the change of culture of everything. But culture is enormous.
Yes.
And that had to have been a huge development for you in coming here, a huge problem to overcome, as well as to just deal with. And your choice of cutting your roots and diving into that new culture was an extremely difficult, conscious choice you had to make.
I don't know to what extent it was conscious, but it was difficult. In many ways, it was difficult. Because, you know, I can actually, at least I can pass. I can pretend that I'm American. There were times when I would hear Greek spoken in the grocery store in graduate school, and I would pretend I didn't understand. I had just so disconnected.
Mostly, are you glad that you speak Greek? My mother was an immigrant, and in our house us children were not taught the language. It was Slovene, and so I don't know the language other than a few words. I wish I did. Are you glad that now, in hindsight, that you do understand Greek?
It is so much a part of me. I don't know what I would do without it. But I didn't teach my son Greek. So I'm like your mother. I didn't teach my son Greek because I'm the generation that cut off the roots.
I get it. Yeah.
There are members of my generation who didn't, who stayed with the Greek church and the Greek religion and the Greek language and all that. I was one who did not. And I don't know which is better. I think I gained and I lost. I think they gain and they lose.
Tess, this has been wonderful. We've run out of time. It's so great to have you on the show. This has been really exciting.
Thank you so much for having me.
You have great stories.
Thanks.
And thank you, Gloria and Anne, for being on the show with me today. It's been wonderful.
Oh, exciting and delightful.
Great.
Very much so. And thank you all for watching Women of the World. We'll see you next time.